In this video, I'd like to provide an overview of what you need to do in order to excel and produce an outstanding first assignment in KCB101, which is, of course, our textual analysis assignment exploring the concepts that we've been talking about in the early weeks of the unit and is directed towards analysing one of these four ads shown here. In this video, we're going to do three things. We're going to start by providing an overview of the first assignment by having a look at the assignment task sheet. Then we're going to have a detailed discussion of an example essay from previous years in KCB 101. We're going to have a look at an excellent assignment, an assignment that received a high distinction, and have a close look at what makes this a high distinction essay, and then how you can think about how to incorporate those features into your own work. And then we're going to wrap up by talking about some helpful hints for writing the first assignment. Let's start by looking at the assignment sheet. So everything here that you need in order to understand the assignment is there. This is a 1,000 word assignment, plus or minus 10%, so somewhere between 900 and 1,100 words. It's due on Friday the 1st of September, 1 minute before midnight, and it's worth 30% of your overall grade in the unit. Now, it's a short assignment, it's only 1,000 words. And what that means is that a lot of the work that you do on this assignment will take place before you actually start writing. So this is an assignment where you're going to have to make a lot of notes beforehand, look at the text that you have selected, and think about what type of meaning it communicates and think about how it communicates that meaning. So that is reflected in the two pieces of information that are highlighted in the instruction section here. So articulate a likely interpretation of the text. So this assignment expects you to state very clearly what your interpretation of the text that you have chosen is. So somewhere early on in the assignment, ideally in the introduction, you should state very clearly that this text means, and insert your interpretation there. Now remember, it's your interpretation. So one of the things that we've spoken about in this unit so far is that there is no right or wrong answer to doing a textual analysis. There's no correct interpretation. There will be certain limits on the types of interpretations that can be made, but this is your interpretation of the text, and of course it is based on evidence. So this refers to the second highlighted piece of information in the instructions section, asking you to provide a detailed analysis of how the text communicates the meaning. So how does the ad that you've chosen communicate its meaning? So that's where you draw on the concepts that we've discussed in the podcasts and podcasts and tutorials and workshops so far. So we want you to be able to articulate and express very clearly what your likely interpretation of the text is, and then provide a detailed analysis of how the text communicates that meaning. Now, that means in practical terms that you're going to have to draft out an argument beforehand rather than just sit straight at the computer and begin writing your assignment. That will become a little clearer as we go through this video, but absolutely, you should not just expect to sit down and attempt to write this assignment in one hit. You're going to have to look at the text first, develop a likely interpretation, develop your meaning of the text, and then provide examples of how the text communicates that meaning using the concepts that we've been speaking about in podcasts and in tutorials. Now, just a friendly reminder that this assignment uses APA, referencing and formatting. So here is a link to the APA section of SiteWrite. Here's a link to the SiteWrite guide, and this is a link to a nice little 2-page cheat sheet on what to look for when you're formatting a document according to APA style. And that is they are the criteria against which you'll be marked against in terms of spelling, grammar, punctuation, and style, and all of those sorts of things. So pay attention to that formatting guideline, set of guidelines as well. Then we've got some more technical details, which I think are very self-explanatory here. Of course, remember, if you need an extension for this assignment, then you must apply for one formally and officially. Neither myself nor the tutors can help you there. And you might want to use first person in this assignment. Again, I think it's probably inevitable, but do so sparingly. Okay, don't overuse first person, but first person is certainly appropriate, and I think in some parts of the essay it will be inevitable. So let's move on and have a look at an example of an outstanding KCB101 essay from previous years and have a look at what makes it so outstanding. Now, before we start, I'd like to point out a few things. So first of all, the example that we're looking at closely here is from an older version of KCB 101. So the text that the student is analysing is different to the ones that you're going to be looking at in your assignment, but the assignment task, what the student did, is absolutely identical to what it is that you're doing. Okay, so different example, same task. That's the first important thing that I'd like you to keep in mind. Secondly, in my discussion, I'm not going to focus a lot on spelling, grammar, punctuation, and referencing, except where it is a problem. And I do that on a couple of occasions, but you will inevitably find some typos that I don't pick up on, and that's deliberate. I'm only focusing on the ones that are the real problem in terms of this assignment. Thirdly, this assignment received a high distinction, but inevitably, because there are some typos and some problems with referencing, it is in no way perfect. So I want to say from the outset, you can get a high distinction in this assignment and not necessarily have written the perfect essay. The way the student has dealt with the concepts and the way they've structured their argument is outstanding and absolutely absolutely worthy of a high distinction. I didn't mark this assignment, but I can 100% hand on heart say without a doubt that if I had marked it, the student would have received a high distinction as well. So it's not a perfect essay, but it is still absolutely worthy of a high distinction. This assignment starts off very strongly. So in the introduction, we have a very brief definition of semiotics, then an explanation of what the assignment intends to do. So it will be a semiotic analysis of Kaz Cook's Up the Duff book cover, which you can see down here. One thing that I think the introduction could have done better, although it is very good and you know, it is an excellent introduction, but I think a way of improving this introduction would be at the end, in the final sentences, to provide a summary of the interpretation. So the student here would have written a better introduction in, I think, and I certainly think your tutors will agree with this, if they had included a summary of their interpretation of the text, what the text was attempting to communicate, in order to orient the reader a little more clearly. So by providing that summary of the interpretation, then the reader has some signposts throughout the essay to guide them in terms of what to look for and to understand the argument that the author is providing in a little more detail. But overall, that is a very good introduction. It's simple, it's clear. Don't muck around with the introduction in this essay. You've only got 1,000 words, so you don't want to chew up a lot of time with a lengthy introduction. Now, if we move on, you'll notice here that I have highlighted some parts of the assignment in different colours. Now, red refers to topic sentences. Blue refers to concepts or definitions, so ideas that have come from the lectures, podcasts, tutorials that you might want to include in this assignment. And remember, we're not asking you to be exhaustive, and you shouldn't feel as if you need to discuss everything that we've spoken about in podcasts and tutorials. Purple refers to examples from the text. So examples, and then green refers to analysis. So those colours appear throughout my discussion of this assignment, and it's just a way of orienting you to the things that I want to point out and suggest that you might like to adapt and incorporate into your own essay. So red, as I said, is the topic sentence, or indicates a topic sentence, and this is pretty clear-cut, pretty straightforward, and pretty powerful. You know, always think about beginning your paragraph, with really clear topic sentences. So here we have, no doubt, what the student is referring to in this opening paragraph. So it's about the title of the book, and they're also going to talk about the concept of extra-textual knowledge. And inevitably, that is the concept that is defined immediately after the topic sentence. So topic sentence, and then the rest of the paragraph lives up to what the topic sentence promises. So we have a definition of extra-textuality there. Now, one thing that you might have picked up on already is that the student has been very inconsistent in their referencing style. So we've got one type of referencing style there, we've got another one here. That's a bit sloppy. That's a bit sloppy. So pay attention to things like that. We notice it when we're marking, so you should pay attention. You should pay attention to that here as well. So topic sentence, definition, then we have our example. So here the student has focused on the title of the book, which is Up the Duff. So here in this section highlighted in purple, the student is explaining what Up the Duff means and how that relates to extra textuality. So why does this idea of the book title being called Up the Duff, why is that an example of extra textuality? Then the green section, and I haven't highlighted all of the rest of the paragraph just so you're not overwhelmed with colour, but the green section then goes on to explain how that example of extra textuality, calling the book Up the Duff, creates meaning. So why is calling this book Up the Duff important? Why has the author of the book, Kaz Cook, chosen to call the book Up the Duff, and what is the significance of that? So it's a very simple structure within paragraphs for this essay. So here we're just talking about a topic sentence, a definition of a key concept that you're going to use. Now remember, make sure that the concepts you use are relevant. So here, extra textuality for this student is a very relevant concept. It may not be for you, so don't be obliged to use every concept. I can't stress that with enough emphasis. We're looking for depth rather than breadth. Depth rather than breadth. So topic sentence, definition, example, analysis. A very simple four-part structure. Topic sentence to set things up, definition of the concept that you're talking about, an example that demonstrates the concept, and then an analysis of how that example creates meaning. And this is a structure that is repeated pretty much in that form throughout the rest of the essay. But before we get to that, I just want to point out another clanger in terms of careless errors here. Now, I've highlighted this in red and underlined it. That word should actually be connote. So the second function of the title is to connote a more relaxed, personal and less clinical meaning. So the student there is referring to the idea of connotative meaning, and she has misspelt connote. Don't do things like that, particularly with technical terms that we're asking you to demonstrate a mastery of. Now, I didn't mark this assignment, and I will absolutely say overall, this assignment, even though it's not perfect, very clearly it's not perfect, it is absolutely worth the high distinction that it received. And it is, going back over the results, as I said at the start, it is the best KCB101 assignment from the previous 2 years. So absolutely worth the high distinction. But I would argue that a little bit more attention paid to referencing and avoiding clangers like that might have resulted in the student receiving a high distinction plus. So just remember that attention to detail is going to be the difference in many instances between a higher or lower grade, or you know, a plus or a minus within that grade band. So pay attention to those little things. Now we can see here again that kind of four-part structure used. Now the order is a little bit, you know, it's a little bit changed around here, and that's okay. This is really nicely written, and some of the parts of the essay kind of merge into one another. So I'll explain that. I'll explain that in a little more detail here. But this is certainly, again, a very, very well-structured paragraph. So we have our topic sentence in red, and the topic sentence is always going to appear at the start. That's what a topic sentence does. So here we've got this non-medical impression is again reinstated in the reader's mind upon inspection of the accompanying cartoon. So very clearly now we've moved on from discussing the title, the book's title, to the cartoon that accompanies it. So we have our example here. It makes more sense to go into a description of the cartoon. So a woman on the front cover, adorned in her maternity wear, etc., etc. Now, here we go into our definition. So here the student is talking about genre and what makes up genre. And then in her analysis, which is in green, she goes on to suggest that one of the ways in which this cartoon produces impact is by deviating from the genre slightly. So we can see that. So there's a little bit of crossover here, but in this sentence, however, the cover does diverge from other texts in the same genre in certain ways. So this sentence here represents a kind of bridge between definition of genre and then the analysis of how the text creates meaning. Again, back into definition. So she's talking about the L learning plate sticker on the cartoon's pregnant belly. She's talking about that in terms of a sign. So again, we have a very good definition of what a sign is, straight from the Graham Turner reading, which was featured in one of our podcasts, and it's on the reading list. So a good summary, paraphrasing of that definition, and then once again explaining why this L plate on the cartoon's stomach represents a sign and how it communicates its meaning. So again, we've got that four-part structure. In this paragraph, developed and used in a bit more of a sophisticated fashion, but absolutely it's there again. So we've got a topic sentence, an example, our definition of our key concepts that we're talking about, and then analysis. So again, the very simple four-part structure. And that is an absolute, almost foolproof way of doing well in this assignment. Because if you think about that structure and you follow it, you have no choice but to engage in analysis. So one of the problems, or one of the areas where people fall down on is, in this assignment, is that sometimes they will be more descriptive rather than analytical. And of course, inevitably, in these purple sections where you are providing an explanation of your example, you will inevitably be descriptive. But we want more green, you know. We want more green in your assignment. So by following this four-part structure, you have no choice but to be analytical, and that will inevitably improve your grade. And again, topic sentence, example, concept. So here our student is talking about signifier and signified in this blue section here, signifier and signified, and then how the baby bump in the cartoon plays on that difference between the signifier and signified in order to communicate meaning. Now again, you'll notice that that the student has really only dealt with 4 concepts so far, and we've covered a lot more in KCB 101 in the first few weeks of KCB 101. So they've only spoken about extra textuality, genre, sign, and then the difference between the signifier and signified. What concepts you choose in your assignment, or what concepts you choose to use to analyze your text in your assignment, will depend on the text. Now, all of the texts for assignment 1 communicate in different ways. That's deliberate. I chose them that way. So you will not necessarily use the same set of concepts as a friend who's analyzing a different ad, and you may not use all of the concepts at all. Now, just really remember that. Depth rather than breadth. We'd rather you demonstrated a detailed understanding of how the concepts work than just being able to spit back to us kind of textbook definitions of the concepts. Now, here we have our conclusion. And once again, it follows, well, here it's a 3-part structure. It's a 3-part structure, so there are no definitions, there's no blue text here, and that's, that's acceptable and expected for a conclusion, because you don't want to be introducing any new ideas into a conclusion, because that will just confuse the reader. So once again, we've got our red topic sentence. Now, here the student has done a really good job in the topic sentence of clearly demonstrating their take on this text. So the cover of Kaz Cook's Up the Duff is successful in conveying the intended meaning of the book through the likely interpretation many readers had of the cover. So then she's explaining why in the green text. So why was it successful? Now that is a summary of everything that's gone before in the essay. Then she provides us with some examples of concepts that she's used. So she's not introducing any new ones here. So we've spoken about intertextuality, extratextuality, signs and connotations. All of those have been discussed in the above essay, and then she's back into the green to explain how those concepts are used to create meaning. And notice she does it very simply, very quickly. So we're not asking you in the conclusion to, rewrite your essay. What we're asking you to do is come to a very clear statement of, does this text successfully convey its meaning? What is that meaning? And then summarize your argument through that interaction between analysis and some examples. So that is a really, really outstanding assignment, not only for KCB 101, but I think for any piece of university work in terms of its structure. It's simple, it's direct, it's to the point, it operates on that 4-part structure throughout, varies it slightly, but overall it really, really closely adheres to that 4-part structure throughout. It is absolutely not perfect. There are some, quite frankly, some really silly mistakes there. Only a couple, but if I was marking this essay, then those couple of little mistakes would have been the difference between an HD and an HD+. Because otherwise, this assignment is an outstanding piece of textual analysis. Now, to wrap up with some helpful hints for doing an outstanding first assignment in KCB 101. Start with the text. As I said right at the very start of this video, have a clear idea of what the text means. In other words, your interpretation of the text before you start writing your essay. So I cannot stress powerfully enough that this is absolutely not the type of assignment that you can sit down and write in one hit. Even though it's 1,000 words, you're going to need to start with the text and then begin developing your interpretation of it before you start writing the essay. And that leads on to the second helpful hint that I'd like to discuss. So as you're looking at your text, as you're coming up with your interpretation, you will begin to identify the key concepts that you can use to demonstrate your analysis. Now that means you only want to use the concepts that apply and that are visible in your text. Now there are 4 texts that you can choose from. You will use a different set of concepts depending on what text you choose to analyze. That's deliberate. That was intentional. So there are some similarities across all of them, inevitably, but then there are some concepts in one text that you will write about if you're analyzing it, and you won't if you're analyzing other texts. So only use the concepts that apply in your text, and not all of them will. And finally, have an argument, okay? So the text you have chosen means this. Insert your interpretation there. And it communicates this meaning in the following way. That's where your analysis goes. Now that is kind of a very simple sentence, a simple kind of structure for how to frame your argument. So obviously your argument will occur over the course of 1,000 words, but very simply, and you can sort of stick this above, print that slide out and stick it above your computer. Be very clear in stating what your text means, so what your interpretation is of this text, and then explain, analyze how it communicates that meaning. And if you follow those 3 helpful hints and pay really close attention to that 4-part structure that I highlighted in the analysis of the sample assignment, you will be well on your way to doing an outstanding job in your first KCB 101 Media and Communication Texts assignment. So thank you everyone. I hope you found this video helpful, and we look forward to reading your first efforts in KCB 101. Thanks a lot.